praise and lift you high, El Shaddai.
Amen. Please be seated. Would you pray with me, please? Most holy and loving God, on this beautiful evening, we ask that your Spirit stir within us and that you bring us a word in due season. That it may be your light that guides our way. It may be your love that surrounds us and upholds us, and it may be your very presence that leads us into your word tonight. I ask this, Jesus, in your holy name. Amen. So, during June, we're focusing on the Psalms. So today I'd like us to look at the, Peter, this is especially for you, to look at the hermeneutics of liturgical music in the early Hebrew temple era and correlate that with a modern, non-religious, metaphorical image structure phenomena. In other words, I'd like to talk to you about dogs and cats. So, you probably know that there's 6 of us in our family. There's myself and there's Chris. There's Pebbles, Odie, Fred and Blinky. And the first person to join our little family was Fred. And we found Fred when I first moved to New York. We were living in Hoboken in New Jersey. Chris was flying up and down the eastern seaboard for work every week, so he was leaving for work on a Monday morning, getting back usually late on a Friday, and I got a bit lonely. So I asked if we could have a cat, and after a while, Chris relented. I can be that dripping tap. And after a while, he relented and said, okay, we can have one. However, what I don't want is some animal that just uses us as a hotel, you know? Some animal that just comes in, eats, sleeps, and then goes out again. If we're going to get a pet, then I want one with some personality. So there was a girl locally who was emigrating to Newcastle, which is my hometown, and she wasn't able to take the cat with her. She was looking to rehome, and I gave her a call and said, I'm looking for a cat with personality. Oh, she said, you'll love Fred. He's got bags of personality. Well, he has. And actually, he's got way too much personality for one animal. The first thing that we found out when we got Fred was that Fred suffers with separation anxiety, which is a nice way of saying that whenever we went out, he destroyed the home. I mean, literally, he'd just rip it to shreds. Worse than any Labrador, this cat could destroy anything. You name it. And in fact, it got to the point where it got so bad that we had to lock him in the bathroom. Lock him in the bathroom when we went out. I mean, obviously with a little tray and water and food. And even then, he'd climb onto the sink, he'd open the cupboard, get all the medicines out, he'd shred the shower curtain, he'd put all the stuff into the bath. This cat just... I knew we had a real problem when one day I was on the way back from work, and if you ever left work and then realised you've left something undone, there's something you should have done, but it was an email that I should have sent and I hadn't done. So when I got in, the first thing I did, rather than feed Fred and make a fuss of him, was to go into the bedroom and get on the computer just to send this email. I must have been in there a minute, maybe 2, and I heard this noise behind me, accompanied by a smell. And I turned round, and Fred was in the middle of our bed, and he had done the biggest poop you have ever seen in your entire life. Not some normal little catty poop that you can pick up with a bit of kitchen roll and a wet wipe. No, no, no. This was the biggest, wettest, smelliest, most disgusting pile of poop you have ever seen in your entire life. And I swear to you, the look on his face said, really, you're going to come in and ignore me? Well, ignore this. And that's Fred. And so when we moved to Maryland, after a while, we thought that perhaps one of the reasons Fred was like this was because he was lonely. So we decided to get another little cat who we called Wilma. Fred, Wilma. Yeah. And Wilma was a lovely little thing. Same colouring, just looked like Fred. They looked like siblings. Except that we'd only had her a few days when she started with this neurological condition. And she would pull all her fur out. So she pulled all the fur out of her legs and out of her tummy. She looked like a little poodle as she wandered along because there was no fur down here at all. And we did everything. Took her to the vets. We had tablets for her. We had calming sprays. We tried different diets. You name it, we tried it. Nothing worked. So in the end, we decided that poor Wilma just had this condition and there was nothing we could do apart from just, love her through it. Then Pebbles joined us. Pebbles was tied up to the fire station across the road from my church office. And as I looked out the window, I could see this pup tied up outside the office. And it was a hot day. It was 90 degrees by sort of midday. And I took some water over, realised there was no shade, eventually knocked on the door of the fire station and said, "Can you take her in? We'll leave a note outside so that whoever's left her will come back." 7 in the evening, I get a phone call saying, "Nobody's been to collect this pup, what should we do?" And I said, "Well, we'll come and get her." So Chris and I decided we'd probably take her to the pound the next day. But in the meantime, we went out and got some food and a lead and a bowl. And then we walked her around the back of the house. And at the back of the church, there were some houses. And in one of them, some guys were sat around, having a little bit of a party, drinking beer, barbecue. And one of them shouted over, "Oi, mister, is that your dog?" And we kind of looked at each other and went, "Well, no, not really." He said, "Well, I think it's mine." I'm like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I left it tied to the tree when I went to work this morning, and when I came back it was gone. So I thought it was just one of my mates playing a prank on me. And we were like, "Oh, okay," horrified at what he said. And then he said, "Anyway, do you want it? I don't want another dog, I've already got one. It's just a girlfriend found this one tied up at the dumpster at the mall and brought it home, but I don't really want it." And Chris and I looked at each other and we were like, "Actually, we don't want a dog, but we are not leaving her with you." So that was it, and that's how Pebbles entered our lives. And Pebbles, again, it turned out, suffered from separation anxiety. Not quite as badly as Fred, but she was very much a hound. So until she met Odie, she never barked. She just bayed like a hound. So the only problem that we had was, because the flat was above the church, then we'd have service on a Sunday morning, and every now and again, like I do here, I would sing communion. And as I was singing communion, all you could hear from upstairs was, "Ow, ow, ow, ow," as the dog sang along. And I was absolutely mortified by this. But everybody else thought it was the funniest thing in the world. But anyway, that was Pebbles. And then that winter, we found Blinky. She was this tiny little thing. It was freezing cold, snow was thick on the ground. She was under a bush. Chris went out to find her, and once he'd seen her, and brought her home. And it turned out that she was pregnant. She was a little feral cat. She must have been only a few months old. She had a couple of kittens, which we then found homes for, and she's been with us ever since. The thing about Blinky is that Blinky is a bit neurotic because she was feral. And I don't know if you've ever taken a feral cat in, but they're not quite the same as domestic cats. So one day, she will come up and snuggle up next to you and want her tummy rubbed, and she'll purr away and she'll want to be with you. And another day, you look at her and she goes, "Ah, he's out to get me!" And she'll run and she'll hide. And as you're walking along, she'll dive backwards and forwards like she's trying to evade capture. And it's just the strangest thing, but that's just what she's like. So eventually, we bought a house, moved into the house, and the house had a nice big back garden. It was all fenced in. So we thought we'd get a playmate for for Pebbles. And we found Odie. Odie was at the local pound. And Odie was very, very near death at the point that we found him. He was nothing but skin and bones. In fact, He's a walker hound, and you could put your hand like that round his back end. That was how big it was. And he was just nothing but skin and bone, and terrified. It turned out he'd been a hunter's dog, and hunters tend to, at the end of the season, once the dogs have reached a certain age, usually 3 or 4, will let the dog go, just let it loose, or they'll shoot it, because it's no longer any use to them. Well, in this particular case, it looks like he'd either escaped or been let go, and we took him home. The thing is, he has this Merle gene, which means that he has a brown eye and a blue eye, kind of very David Bowie. But it also means that he's not quite all there. He's very unpredictable. And I remember when we first got him, and he was terribly nervous. And one day we were upstairs, and we heard this howling from downstairs, and we thought, what on earth is going on? And we raced downstairs, and Odie had wandered into the dining room. Fred had wandered in after him and decided to lay across the threshold to the door. And of course then it meant that Odie couldn't get out of the room without going past Fred. And Odie was terrified of Fred, so he just sat in the middle of the room and howled until we came to get him. And again, Fred was just sat there with this look on his face, like a 5-year-old in the back of the car. Like, what? I'm not doing anything. It wasn't me. I'm just here. I'm just, you know. So that was the family. And then, of course, Wilma unfortunately became ill, which is why we're now down to 6 of us. It turned out she had kidney failure. And we took her to the vet, and the vet suggested a whole course of therapy, but it was quite intrusive, and we really didn't want that for her. So we said, you know what, we'll just take her home, and we'll just, you know, when she gets really bad, we'll bring her back, and then you can help her sleep. And the vet said, okay, the only thing is, because she's got kidney problems, you need to make sure that she's got her own litter tray. We've got 3 cats. How do you give a cat its own litter tray when you've got 3 cats? So we had this great idea. Since we'd moved into the house, the flat above the church we were just using for church meetings, and we both used it for offices, and we'd have lunch there, etc. So we thought, let's take her to the church, and she can be the church cat. Well, you wouldn't credit it, after a couple of days, she settled in, her fur started to grow back, she started to get better, she was a great mouser. She'd go and hunt mice in the church. In the morning we'd get to the church and she'd run down the hallway to greet us, and she was friendly. And the last 6 months of her life were just the happiest that she'd ever been. And then we realised what it was, and it was that Fred had been torturing her for all these years, and we just didn't realise that was what was going on. Now, of course, you can't do that with Blinky, because Blinky has this feral streak, so when he starts on her, she just starts straight back again. So you can't get away with that. And Fred used to torture the dogs. He used to like to jump on them when they were asleep. But Odie, because he's kind of one of these, you know, Odie would just whip round and snap at him. And a couple of times we found a great big chunk of fur missing from Fred, where obviously Fred hadn't been quick enough, and Odie had kind of like taken a chunk of fur out. So Fred stopped doing that. And of course he's an old man now. Fred's 19, so he's not the cat that he once was. He's still very belligerent. He still behaves like he owns the place and we're his personal slaves. Odie is still just that little bit touched, bless him. He's just you for example, you'll come for a cuddle, and you'll have him on his back and you'll cuddle his tummy, and suddenly he'll just start howling like he's in terror. And then you'll stop, and he'll stop for a second, and then you go, okay, again. This is like, what? So that's just Odie. And yeah, that's our family. And I know my pets. I mean, I know them really well. Pebbles is very much the head of the family. She's kind of like the shepherd. She always likes to make sure that everybody's together. She doesn't like to lose anybody. So everybody has to be kind of in the same area. Odie, his neurological problems mean that he can act in the strangest ways. But to be honest, I find it really endearing. In fact, of all of them, he's kind of my favourite, because he's my little boy. You know, He's just this little, he just needs extra care. He just needs an extra hand. And then Blinky, of course, is still neurotic. One day she thinks you're chasing her, and the next day she's all over me like a cheap suit. Fred is evil. He's handsome, he can be affectionate, there's lots and lots of fun, way too much personality for one animal, and he can be a bully. And they all shed hair, which means inevitably we end up having to at least hoover the rugs every day just to keep the allergies at bay. And both Pebbles and Fred both have a habit of using rugs to go to the toilet whenever they feel like it. So all the rugs that we have down are all washable. They all go into the washing machine so that we can take care of them. And on occasion they have health issues, especially as they're getting older. I mean, beagles are prone to what's called a dietary indiscretion. This is what the vet calls it, which basically means they walk around with their noses to the ground and they eat anything they see that might be food. So before you can even think about stopping them, they've swallowed it, which means that inevitably, you know, they're at the vet. We've had a situation where the doorbell went to answer the door, came back, they'd gone through a box of chocolates. £300 later, both of them had their stomachs pumped, you know, bam, bam, bam. Expensive animals. But can you imagine how ridiculous would it be for me to expect them to be anything other than they are? What would be the point of being angry with Pebbles because of her separation anxiety? Or with Fred because he acts out when he's bored? Can you imagine me punishing Blinky because she's neurotic? Or Odie because he can be moody? I mean, do you think that I love Fred any less just because sometimes he can be an absolute bully? Do you think I love Pebbles any the less when she pees on a rug? Do you think I love Blinky any the less because even after 12 years she still thinks I'm out to get her? And do I love Odie any less because he has special needs? Or in fact, do I love him more because he has these flaws? In Psalm 139, David gets to the core of our relationship with God. God knows us completely. When I sit down and when I rise up is a Hebrew euphemism. It's a Hebrew saying. And it basically means that God doesn't just know you from the tip of your toes to the crown of your head. God knows you from before you were born to way after the end of existence, the end of time. This is why the psalmist then goes into detail to explain it. There's nothing that God doesn't know about you. God knows you. If you come to Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 to 11, Jesus says, ask and it will be given you, search and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who searches finds, and for everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. Is there anyone among you who, if your child asked for bread, would give a stone? Or if the child asked for a fish, would give a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will God in heaven give good things to those who ask for them? We are made in God's image. And if we can love and care for our pets, how much more so does God love and care for each of us? Put another way, if you think that a pet is worth loving, worth sacrificing your time for, your money for, your home for, then how much more so does God see you as worth loving and worth sacrificing for? You know, the psalmist can't tell you why God made you lesbian or gay or trans or bi or straight or male or female or non-binary or short or tall or any of the other big questions that we might have about life. However, the psalmist can tell you that God made you and that God knows you and God loves you and cares for you. That you are a member of God's family. You are one of God's children. It's what the psalmist wrote about 3,000 years ago. It's the message that Jesus brought. It's the good news of the kingdom that Jesus teaches. You are worth loving. You are worth sacrificing for. Pebbles, Odie, Fred, Blinky will put it this way. Woof, woof, meow, meow. And you better believe it. Amen.